Hi everyone, I'm going to talk about macromolecules or biological molecules of cells. There's four main molecules which we call macromolecules that make up cells, and they're carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. And these also sound like the things we eat to survive, and that's why we eat these things, because they make up our cells and we're made up of cells. It's the same thing when you grow microbes in lab. You need to provide them with carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids, and they each have a function in our cells, and they're called the four biological molecules or macromolecules. I'm starting out with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are important for long-term and short-term energy. For short-term energy, we think of simple carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are sugars. For long-term energy, we think of complex carbohydrates. If you break down a carbohydrate, its monomers are monosaccharides. So that's what carbohydrates are made up of. And if you break that down even more, they're made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So that's what carbohydrates are for. Their main function is short-term energy, but they can also be used for long-term energy. And they're made up of monosaccharides. That's the monomer. The next one is lipids. Lipids is important for making cell membranes. It's called a phospholipid bilayer, and it's also important for long-term energy, not short-term. That's carbohydrates. Lipids are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and if you break a lipid, its monomers are fatty acids and glycerol. So again, their function is making membranes. All cells have membranes. Phospholipids are the main component of cell membranes, which form the lipid bilayer. So that's why lipids are important, and they also act as long-term energy reserves. So fats can store more energy than carbohydrates. Another macromolecule after that is protein. Protein is one of the most important macromolecules of cells, because many things in cells are made up of proteins. If you break down a protein is made up of amino acids. And when we think of amino acids, they're made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sometimes there's sulfur depending on the amino acid. But the monomers of proteins are amino acids, and there's 20 different amino acids. Proteins are important because they make up enzymes, and enzymes speed up chemical reactions. So without enzymes, your cells' reactions could take like hundreds of years. You would die without enzymes. That's why you need proteins. And they also play structural roles in cells. They play transport roles. So in the phospholipid bilayer in the membrane, there's transport proteins, antibodies are proteins, enzymes are proteins, hemoglobin is a protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen in human cells. So proteins are very important, and again, they're made up of amino acids. And the last macromolecule is nucleic acids. The structure of nucleic acids is nucleic acids are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And nucleic acids, the monomers of them, if you break down a nucleic acid, are nucleotides. Examples of nucleic acids are DNA and RNA, and they function in genetic information storage. So those are the four macromolecules. Carbohydrates for short-term and long-term energy, they're made up of monosaccharides. Example of that is glucose. Lipids are made up of fatty acids and glycerol. They're important for making the cell membrane and for long-term energy. Proteins, their monomers, they're made up of amino acids, and they have so many different functions, but one example is enzymes. They speed up chemical reactions. And then finally, nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are DNA and RNA. If you break them down, their monomers are nucleotides, and they're important for genetic information storage. So that is that. And then carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Lipids are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen as well. Proteins are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sometimes sulfur, depending on the amino acid. And then finally, nucleic acids are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So Those are the macromolecules of cells. So you need to eat all of that. And we've all heard of carbohydrates, sugars, lipids, fats, and proteins. Sometimes people wonder, like, how do you get nucleic acids? Nucleic acids are DNA or RNA. If you eat anything living, you're getting nucleic acids. And it doesn't matter whether you're vegetarian or not, because plants have DNA in them. So when you eat plants, you're getting nucleic acid.